like all the time. What was I forgetting?
Here we are. We're back.
Kids, another bit of trouble.
Oh man, I tell you what.
Schools. Yeah, do this. All right. Well, I'm just checking online. We are live. It looks like. I think we're muted, which is good. We're good to go. All right. How you guys doing?
We're doing great.
Good Thanksgiving.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that's good. Like, look behind Leroy's head. See that? My office decorated for Christmas. That my Charlie Brown tree is all I got, but that's not on the camera. It's just a little cute little I won those at a white elephant gift a couple years ago. Nobody wanted them, and I thought that's perfect. I want it for my office.
Oh, you mean the lamps?
The little Christmas lamp things.
You know what? The worst white elephant thing I've ever done is I knew what I brought to the white elephant, and I made sure that we went home.
You wanted it. Oh my gosh.
We went home with it. That was pretty bad. And people knew. You bought those cups.
And then you're forced to go home with them.
Oh, so listen. Speaking of cups. So I have this kid who develops websites, and he just made himself a website. And on his website, he sells all these shirts and hats and cups that are just really hokey, that people like, trinkets that people like at Christmas.
Yeah.
And a year ago, he told me this story, and his story is, and you guys will like this. His story was one of the most well-known Bible apps it was developed by an atheist.
Oh yeah.
True. And
which one is that?
I don't know which one it was, but I know that he's made millions of dollars off of this Bible app, and it's a great Bible app. So I said to this kid, I said, "Well, you're making all these shirts. You know what we need to do? We need to make up all these liberal shirts and hats and cups." I said, "They are spending money on everything. If you just say you don't like Donald Trump, they'll spend $1 million."
That's true.
I said, "We should do that." No,
the little thing like no MAGA hat or
something.
No
MAGA. Watch this.
I bet you that hat was so bad.
Hope and change is not strange.
I'm sure you can make tons of money.
Republicans, anti-science, anti-climate change, something anti-life in the world or whatever like that. I mean, we could just think of millions of them, and those people would eat them up.
Yeah, but you have to come up with some sort of subversive thing, like on the tag or somewhere like micro printed somewhere that like they're carrying. So I don't know. I'd have to.
You'd have to
be satisfied. I'd have to
micro
stamp something in there for me.
It would be funny.
Money wouldn't be enough. But
no.
All right.
It's pretty funny. Though.
Well, if you can make money off of it, yeah, sure, why not?
Well, if you can make money off it, you can sell anything, right?
Sure.
Even our speech.
Speaking of speech,
segue.
That's what we were going to talk a little bit about today. I kind of texted you guys earlier with the idea of like I was looking through just a bunch of the articles I gathered and have a bunch here, just all kind of thematic about the idea of free speech and where it's at. And so I said, look at all these things. We got to get through some of these, because this would make an interesting sort of thematic idea. So, but before we get to that, because I know Ward, and this actually has a transition. Before we get to free speech, this actually has a transition. Believe it or not, you're not going to know what it is, but when I get there, you're going to be impressed. All right. This is our fun story.
Fun story.
Is this the
with
one
a segue?
With a segue.
Was this the one about witches in Hollywood?
No, that was on the first one. It has no transition to anything. This is actually an entertaining one. Siberia, quote unquote.
So watch how a transition.
Yeah.
How a relevant one.
That's right.
Yeah.
Excellent point. So. Quote: Siberian unicorn once walked among early humans.
Okay.
This is true. This is legit. This is a legit story.
Okay.
So this is from CNN. Okay. Unless you're a Trump fan, then of course it's fake news no matter what. Yeah. But no, this is actually a legit story.
All right. If it's not talking about Trump, how to hate Trump, it may be legitimate.
Not like a real unicorn. So, an extinct giant rhinoceros, sometimes described as a Siberian unicorn, lived on the planet much longer than scientists previously thought. New research shows. The study published Monday in the Journal of Nature and Ecology and Evolution says that the shaggy creature once roamed among humans, surviving in Eastern Europe and Western Asia until at least 39,000 years ago, around the same time of the Neanderthals and modern humans. And they got like a cute little picture on it. See, like it actually looks like more like a unicorn, right? I mean, it looks like a big horse-like,
big donkey type furry thing with a horn on it.
Yeah, it's like a donkey horse-like.
But it's from a rhinoceros species.
Because
it looks like an overdeveloped elk.
Theorized or early, proto horse kind of like the rhinoceros sort of evolved something into some horse-like creature. But I thought two things were interesting about this.
Yeah.
One is that, prior to this, they thought this sort of unicorn-type creature went extinct long before humans were around.
Okay.
So now that this updates it by about 150 million years sooner. Or no, I'm sorry, 150,000.
150,000.
Because I think they sort of went extinct about 200 to 300,000 years ago. So anywhere from 150 to 250,000 years younger, more recent than once thought, which puts it contemporaneous with, humans. Even on, no matter what evolutionary scale you want to put, which...
Including the Rolling Stones.
Yeah, because they are about that old. But I think that's fascinating because, you get like in the Bible, the translation in the Old Testament, like unicorn, which is, they meant rhinoceros or something like that.
Right.
But if you look at, these little artist renderings and stuff that they have on these things, it's much closer to a horse-like unicorn that we'd see. It looks less like a rhinoceros. It's thinner. Now,
when you reference in the Bible, what are you referring to?
Old Testament, in the King James, they translate one of the passages that the word unicorn is translated.
Oh, is that right?
Which is given a lot of flack because, well, that's why the Bible translation, is wrong or it's antiquated, because there's no such thing as a unicorn, and they translate some mythical creature.
Only mythology.
Yeah. But historically, I think it's interesting because you can make the case.
Except science now says.
Yeah,
there were unicorns.
There were unicorn-like creatures that were contemporaneous with even early humans according to evolutionary scale. Oh. So that would be in the conscious memory. It could have been all kinds of cave drawings, and the fact that they're like pretty white, whatever, doesn't necessarily mean that the images
magical powers
might be exact. Yeah, magical powers. That might be fictionalized, but it could be on a real creature that looked much like. Sure. So I thought that was interesting.
That is.
As science kind of puts that unicorn creature closer to humans, that legitimizes some of those fairy tales in terms of there might have been historic precedent to this.
Chalk one up for the King James version.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's very interesting. A couple of weeks ago they found the remains of a Neanderthal, supposedly, but a human whose child who was eaten by a prehistoric bird.
Mm.
And they found the remains having passed through because they thought it was originally animal bones.
Oh, yeah.
But they looked close and realized that it was a child that had passed through the digestive system of a bird.
Oh,
I was actually pulling this up. This happened in Poland. They found this in Poland.
Oh, yeah.
So what kind of prehistoric bird was it?
It was snapping up people, and
the big one.
Tiny holes in the bones indicate that they had passed through a large bird's digestive system, according to Professor Paweł Waldej-Nowak of the Jagiellonian University in Krakow. It's not clear, however, whether the bird attacked and ate the young Neanderthal or scavenged the remains of a dead child.
Yeah. There's a lot of actually crazy, wild discoveries happening with Neanderthals, and it's changing radically the evolutionary history of what that's supposed to have been like and assumed for so long. China just did a recent thing. The Neanderthals weren't these barrel-chested, hunched-over things, and most of the evidence shows now that they were quite intelligent. They had complex tools, that they squawked upright, not hunched over, that they weren't this transitionary creature in the evolutionary scheme, and that they interbred regularly with humans, with modern Homo erectus, modern humans, which is a sign that they're the same species, not a distinct species, because they're able to interbreed.
What about the report I've heard recently that now, even I think it was from Nature as well, I have to go back and double check, that all human beings may have progressed from
two people. That was just in the news yesterday.
Yeah, so it's a little bit overstated. In that connecting it to the biblical. Well, we have to be just careful because their argument is. I know you're just asking, but Christian cycles pick it up.
Sure,
it's not arguing for an Adam and Eve.
Correct.
In their sense, it's talking about a bottleneck of two being the precursors. So they're not arguing against that potentially there were precursors to humans that had evolved from
hominids.
Those specific scientific things are saying that, about 250,000 years ago, roughly, sort of standard dating time, that there is this explosion of all species being traced back to small numbers. Some might trace it to a Noah's Ark type event, or some to an Adam and Eve type event. Biblically, you're never going to connect that for sure scientifically. But it is interesting, though. I think the big takeaway is that the idea that two humans could not populate the Earth is not scientifically impossible, as some people want to argue. Like
Right.
Adam and the Genome is a recent book that, theistic evolution people argue, it had to be a group of 10,000 or more. But even the author of that, Swami Das, is a guy who authored that, and he with McKnight, and he's even conceded in discussions after that, well, it's not really absolute that it has to be that many.
Mhm.
So
Right.
even though that's the exact premise of his book, he's conceded all.
Yeah, because that's much different. I mean,
Yeah.
2 is much different than 10,000, 5,000
Yeah.
bottle. What do you call it, a bottleneck?
Yeah, the bottleneck, yeah.
But down to 2, I mean, that's
Yeah.
I don't know. That gives more. No matter how you take the Old Testament, that gives more credence to
Yeah.
this version of, hey, an Adam and Eve, literally or otherwise, they were talking about coming from.
Yeah.
You know,
And all
very
those
few people.
models go anywhere between 200,000 to 300,000 years for that first
Right.
couple, so to speak.
Mhm.
So none of those models necessarily go back to, say, like a young Earth, 6 to
Right.
10,000.
Right.
But then again, none of them are really looking. Well, there are people pursuing how young could that get. No one's saying right now that it could get that young in terms of scientifically evidenced whatever. I'm dubious about most of those things, in that when you look at long history like that, the scientific processes we have are really not going to give us
What
we would love to have,
Right.
which is incontrovertible.
and they're
fact,
not, and they're not,
proof.
and the thing is, they're not designed to give us that either.
Yeah, there's too many unknowns that
Right.
you can't account for.
And that's the,
that
I'm not trying to get off the subject, but that's the thing about listening to the scientific evidence, is that it's not designed to answer whether the Earth came into existence, 6,000 years ago. I mean, you just assume the dating of any rock dating method starts at 50,000 years.
Yeah.
So they're not going to give you, I mean, the Genesis view. They're going to give you something other than that. Now, what we can, and I think this is a great point that you made. What we can take away from it is they're not ruling out. They can't. The very fact that they can't rule out our
that's
view
exactly that's
is-
more of the
is
point.
positive.
Is you cannot rule out
Right.
scientifically the idea of two
Right.
being at the genesis, so to speak.
And we need to
of humanity.
understand. We need to understand that that's a valuable point
Yes.
for our perspective.
And as Christians are arguing this for a biblical account of creation, we also don't want to overstate the evidence that we think is in our that says, this is a possibility. It's not saying it's fact. It's not saying it's 100%. It makes it a probable case, but not one where we want to say science has proven Adam and Eve is real. We want to avoid those kind of headlights in our argument.
Because implicit in that supposedly positive statement, science has proven, is our ultimate undoing of our view if we rested on that, because everyone knows that every scientific theory, even if it's stated as true or so-called fact, can and will be overturned at some point.
Yeah, and that's actually
the subtle
And I
point.
had this article for later and talking about this idea of free speech, which we'll get to, and you'll know why unicorns are related to free speech.
Okay,
So we'll get there.
We'll
I'm
get
not gonna
there.
go
I have a question on the unicorn article, though.
Okay, good, and then I'll do this one.
Okay, yeah.
Well, actually, let's circle back. Let me just do this because it's really his point, and then
Okay.
that'll circle us back to that. So this is the title of an article: "Evolution More Certain Than Gravity?" And it's really looking at this idea that many Christians. It's funny because a lot of theistic evolution. Christians who believe that God guided this evolutionary process, which I think is an oxymoron. You can't really actually have that, but that's another conversation. But they're using that phrasing like this is absolutely fact. It's a certain. It's like Dawkins does in his book, The Fact of Evolution. You get these Christian authors writing it because they're trying to seem like they're relevant and they're not anti-science. But in saying that evolution is as a fact more certain than even gravity, they're demonstrating an ignorance of what science is, which is what you just pointed out. So this article just says, I'll just read a couple little paragraphs out of it, and just because I think it relates to that point. It says, imagine two science teachers. Mr. Smith teaches straight out of the textbook. He expects students simply to memorize and correctly regurgitate. The other, Mr. Jones, or the other, Mrs. Jones, supplements her teaching with challenging mainstream material that casts the textbook position in a new, more critical light. she asked students to weigh some of the evidence for themselves, like real scientists do. Which sounds like the better teacher? Well, the Miss Jones, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is a question that lawmakers have considered in a serious legislative battle across the country over academic freedom for high school science instructors. The idea that students are well served by creative, challenging instructions will seem uncontroversial, except that is when the subject is evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Then all that breaks loose. And why do you think that is? Whether the standard neo-Darwinian mechanism fully explains the origins of biological novelties is a question that scientists themselves increasingly contest. And that's true. Atheist, non-Christian scientists are really having a lot of problems. There's conferences in Europe this last year that have talked about we need to radically rethink Darwinian evolution.
Michael Behe just released a book.
Yeah, but he's a Christian doing that.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is there are non-Christian scientists who are having conferences about how we need to recast this.
Mm-hmm.
Not because they accept the Christian worldview or a theistic one, but they just
because
realize
this one doesn't.
This one has problems.
Right.
And so that goes to the point of like why we need free speech, why we need to question, why we need to be open to these things and critical, because it doesn't mean they're not false. It just means they're positive and negatives to all these theories, and science will eventually overturn itself in many cases.
It certainly will, and that's
okay. That's the process.
It is bound. This is why, for years you'll hear the Christian philosopher of science saying something to the effect that evolution is already a defeated idea. I mean, Stephen Myers talks about it all the time, and the reason being, we talk about this about some religious ideas. Some religious ideas cohere, and because they cohere, people hold on to them as if they were the truth of all truths because they cohere. But the reality is, coherence is not the real test of truth. It's a negative test of truth. Lies cohere.
Yeah,
a good lie will cohere. It sticks together.
It's internally consistent.
It's internally consistent with itself.
Lie.
The problem with the lie is it doesn't account for the truth. The problem with some of these religious ideas and a scientific idea like evolution is that it accounts for a segment of the truth. That means that there's things that it's leaving out. And once you bring those things that it leaves out into the equation, then it falls apart. Some religious ideas. I think religious ideas that are based on the coherence theory of truth ultimately discount facts that weigh against or militate against their particular view. Scientific ideas that purport to explain all the data while leaving out crucial points of the data. Once those points of the data are counted in, ultimately will lead to the downfall. And that's why these guys are all saying evolution is toppling, because portions of it don't. They may cohere, but it doesn't account for all the data. You can have a
systematic theology on a theological side. Somebody can have a very coherent systematic theology of all their stuff fits together.
Sure.
But it may be excluding or changing or redefining certain biblical texts to make that fit. With their cohere with their system.
Right.
So it happens that theology, science can happen like this.
It also happens in fiction. I mean, Star Wars. You have a coherent worldview of Star Wars.
Yeah.
It doesn't match reality. Just because it's coherent doesn't mean it's true.
And all the ensuing versions, you can just rewrite. This is.
But you know what's fascinating about this? This is an aside. This is an interesting aside. DC's in Marvel. DC's worldviews don't cohere. That's why they don't make good movies. That's why they've never made good comic books. Marvel's worldview is always coherent, and that's why they've always made.
You can send all the hate mail to Leroy Hill at I Hate DC Comics.
You can send me all the hate mail that you want to, and I would still. DC has the better characters. Batman, most well-known characters. Superman and Batman. Those are the two most. They have the two most well-known characters, but their worlds don't cohere.
The worlds collide.
And that's why people don't. They don't take to them like they do Marvel.
We can do a whole show on that.
I could do
Probably
that.
Not, but just
I could do that.
All right. So your idea about the unicorn.
Not my idea. Just a question regarding about the bird that ate the kid.
Oh yeah.
Right.
That was
on the New article. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, was that on your article?
Yeah.
Okay.
That wasn't the unicorn that ate the kid.
Oh, no, I know. But the bird that ate the kid was that? Did they talk about the what kind of humanoid that was?
They were attempting to say it was a Neanderthal.
Okay.
And you're asking the question for good reason, because you're saying implied in your statement is that you have a prehistoric animal and a human living at the same time.
There it is.
Right.
So.
Yeah,
the
and
potentiality
that's
of the
where
Oh, I know that's exactly where you're going.
the assumptions you make going in about what that is will determine how people interpret that evidence.
Exactly.
That's exactly what we're
Therefore, it
seeing.
has to be this era because
Yeah,
animal
and
lived in that
that's-
era. But is that necessarily the case? Because now we're finding out that Neanderthals, you know what? Maybe they did actually walk upright versus this. Maybe you know. So
yeah, and what most people don't realize is that the standard dating models all have a lot of those assumptions built in. So when you change even facts like this, that a Neanderthal could have eaten this bird, that messes with the timelines.
right. And they don't like that.
Watch
No,
this.
and that's why a lot of these articles themselves will become popular. But if you really dig into what that evidence is, it invalidates other assumptions that were built on that. So that becomes the problem.
Which is the construct that we're talking about.
Yeah.
If these parts come up that don't care. Listen to this. The closest human species to Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, lived in Eurasia for around 350,000 years. Scientists in Poland report that Neanderthals in Europe mostly became extinct 35,000 years ago. However, there are a number of theories on the timing
of the rhinoceros.
Right. Of the that dealy bopper.
Yeah.
Of the timing of Neanderthals' extinction, which experts say that it could have occurred 40,000 or 27,000 or 24,000 years ago. Why are these numbers shrinking? Do you see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. That's a drastic difference between 24,000 and 350,000. It just tells you, if you're paying attention, that there's something wrong with the data that they're telling us.
Right. Well, there's something wrong with the interpretation.
Right.
Not the data.
Not the data, but the interpretation.
The interpretation.
Right.
It's like the data. Interpretation doesn't fit the data, and they're not. And Christians have been, as you point out there, previously, they're exempt from the discussion of being able to question naturalism or evolution.
Yeah.
So if you are disbarred.
See, this is free speech, because you're raising a question that I hope that we get to here.
Yeah.
I get frustrated when you have, in our country right now, I watched the thing on the news yesterday where two girls were told that if they were to put something out about their cake shop that says that they don't serve homosexuals or whatever. Now, no one would do that. Right. No one would do that. No one who wants to stay in business long would do that. But if they were told if they did that, they would be thrown in jail. And I thought to myself,
is it Canada?
This is in America.
Okay.
This is in Arizona.
Sounds Canada.
How are we getting to this place where I used to think that we were the land of the free and the home of the brave, that we could say what we want, even if it was offensive, and the recourse or the payment was that people either agreed with you and they would buy your product, or they disagreed with you and go out of business. But now what you have are legislations all over the country that are attempting to tell people what is proper to say and what is improper to say, and that's wrong.
That gets to the unicorn thing. My question today is sort of free speech becoming the last unicorn of human rights? We're all for advancing this sort of. You like that? Beautiful.
That's a good segue.
That's a great segue.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's this creature that once existed.
Right. This mythological creature.
But it was real.
Right.
But it's become so deformed and so distorted through
its
legend
image
and stuff because we've reshaped what it means, like who's allowed to have it and not have it. That it's become this other image of something it once was supposed to be. Okay. As we're fighting for all kinds of human rights in different areas, is it really becoming like this sort of unicorn? Is it even real anymore? We don't even know. What is it? It's a sort of mirage of history, maybe. So that's why this article is titled, "Why is freedom of speech an important right? When, if ever, can it be limited?" So this one's coming from the New York Times. And they said that, freedom of speech originally was one of the benchmark rights of the West, of the United States especially, enshrined in the Constitution. And it seems like America and liberty, it's all connected, and it should not even be questioned. And they're like, well, is that right? Well, not really so much. And so here's what they say. Even though the concept of freedom of speech on its face seems quite simple, in reality there are complex lines that can be drawn around the kinds of speech which are protected in what setting. The Supreme Court declared in the case of Schneck versus the United States in 1919 that individuals are not entitled to free speech that presents a clear and present danger to society. For example, A person cannot falsely yell fire in a crowded theater because that speech doesn't contribute to the range of ideas being discussed in society, yet the risk of someone getting injured is high. On the other hand, in Brandenburg versus Ohio in 1969, the court declared that even inflammatory speech, such as racist language by the leader of a Ku Klux Klan, should generally be protected unless it's likely to cause imminent violence. While the text of the principle of the First Amendment have stayed the same, the court interpretation has indeed changed over time. Judges, lawmakers, and scholars continue to struggle with balancing strong speech protections with the necessity of maintaining a peaceful society. So,
I think the last line, the last part that you talked about, is that the text remained the same, but our discussions around the text and the case law that arose around free speech is what's changing our perspective of free speech. So again, this is not dealing with the Constitution itself. It's dealing with people's feelings about other people's speech. It's got nothing to do with the Constitution. Those words haven't changed.
Yeah, what's changed is the definition of what is violence and peace. Because people are using words that are now equal to violence.
I'll give you an
So that's one of the reasons that's happening, too. It's so that they can have precedent for those things.
I'll give you even another example. We have a student on our campus, great guy, and he's a younger guy, and he's heard me talk about race before, and he came to my office one day to correct me on my talk about race, and I looked at him and I said, you know what? I said, I'm 52 years old. I've been around this country for a long time, and I said, what you're trying to do is you're trying to take your sensitivities talk about race and trying to force me to live by your sensitivities, and I'm sorry. I'm not going to do that. It's the same thing with Donald Trump. We talked about Donald Trump before. People are frustrated because of Donald Trump's speech and what it says. But again, I've been around. You guys have probably been around. I've been around longer than both of you guys. You know, older than both of you guys.
I don't know. Ward's pretty old though.
Ward's pretty ugly too. But I remember. I know it's a total cheap shot.
Threw him under the unicorn.
I know. But I remember that this is how people in our country talked. You didn't like it, but that's because we understood that we're, as free people, it is courtesy and charity that I limit my speech, and respect for the other individual. But if I don't have that courtesy, honor, or charity toward the other individual, why should I have to do that?
Yeah. You limiting your speech has never really been never been a reality. But anyway,
I know.
So
well, I do.
So it seems that part of the issue surrounds those who don't want certain freedoms granted. The PC police going around.
Yeah.
And so they cannot eliminate directly, or at least it's very hard to eliminate directly, the freedom of speech, right? And the freedom of religion, because they're embedded in our Constitution, bylaws and whatnot. It's just embedded there. But instead of going after those things directly, they figured out that they can go after them piecemeal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Until they've erected a structure.
They can piecemeal it in such a way that okay, sure, you have a right to have your freedom of speech, but I have a right not to hear it, and I can demand not to hear it. So you still have your right, but it just can't impose on me. So for all intents and purposes, the right is diminished or gone, or eventually gone.
Yeah.
They can, the death of a thousand nicks.
Yeah.
And the freedom of speech and I think freedom of religion are in view in the sights of dying a death of a thousand nicks. And qualifications. That's part of the issue going on because of the emotions, because of people's sensitivities, because these people will react in such a way that if I say this, they're going to react. Therefore, I'm wrong. No longer are they convicted for a crime. I'm convicted for what I said. When I was in Indonesia, they had there was something very interesting. When I was there, I noticed that none of the couples that I saw, married couples, ever showed, they really didn't show any public affection. Almost zero, none.
No PDA.
Yeah, really, they just really didn't, and really odd. I was like, that's different. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is they don't use toilet paper, so they're not going to hold hands. They wipe in a particular way, wouldn't do that. But they really didn't even put an arm around each other very much. They didn't
Yeah, my wife wouldn't hold my hand either if I did that. So
exactly. But and that's very common in other cultures. But they didn't. There wasn't kissing and stuff like that. And I asked my friend. I said, well, "What's going on here?" He says, "Well, here's how it works. If somebody shows, PDA, and some other people are
public displays of affection,
public displays of affection, and somebody else is emotive, affected by it, right? Okay. And they do something. The person who showed the PDA, they're responsible.
Oh gosh.
Okay, because they aroused the other person.
That's insane.
Okay, and that's basically the logic of how it goes.
I guarantee there's a reasoning behind it.
So this goes right back to responsibilities,
right,
and where you place responsibilities.
There's some reasoning behind it.
It's consistent with, believe it or not, when we were sitting in Indonesia again. We were sitting in a van, and a motorcycle rear-ended us lightly, but it hit us. Everyone in the van was scared. They looked around for a cop because the law is this. If you're in an accident with a motorcycle, you're at fault. The non-motorcycle is at fault. Doesn't matter if the motorcycle hit you.
Oh, really?
The non-motorcycle vehicle is at fault. And they were all like, oh my gosh. And the motorcycle guy, he waved off, goes, no, it's my fault. And they're like, there's no cop around. He waved it off.
I just get a motorcycle and they're ramming into people. Oh, it's your fault.
Well, this is so it's a putting off of responsibility, and now I don't have to change who I am. Mm-hmm. Now you have to change for me. It's insidious. It's more than just freedom of speech. It's an insidious moral issue.
This is not a conservative or liberal. It's not a political issue in that sense that we have it, and that's the problem. Like, let me read this, and I want to do one other article that illustrates this.
Remind me to come to the Tower of Babel thing.
Yeah, so let's do this because I think it's interesting. So here's what the actual in the Constitution and the First Amendment. Here's what it says: Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. That's the text we have that we're dealing with. And I posted on Twitter this particular article that was talking about how, in this case, it was some Christians who were shut down from some free speech. And I got this angry reply from this guy full of profanities, how, you conservatives are so wimpy, you're a bunch of, snowflakes, and you can't.
That was one of the deals I wanted, is Republican snowflakes.
You're a snowflake, you can't handle some criticism, and your emotions are hurt. And I'm thinking, nothing I said was emotional. Nothing was that I'm offended. It's just the fact that this is a restriction of free speech. And so I had sent a couple responses to him, but here's one article that I think pretty much demonstrates this is not a liberal conservative issue. Headline on this one: Michigan College cancels the vagina monologues because not all women have vaginas. By the way, if your kids are listening, you might want to have stopped listening 30 seconds before I read that. So, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's your warning after the fact. Yeah.
Shocked parents.
Yeah. Well, little Timmy, what is it?
Our numbers are dropping.
Yeah, I know. Right? So leaders at a college in Michigan decided to cancel the production of the vagina monologues because it's discriminatory, given not all women have vaginas. The Women's Resource Center in Eastern Michigan University could put the kibosh on the famous production back from 1994, by the way. Since it came out, since it caters to only women who have physical anatomy that accompanies the female sex, according to the Ann Arbor News. The decision comes after the Resource Center conducted a survey asking respondents about the vagina monologues. These opponents to the drama said they were concerned about the fact that the production excludes some women, namely those who don't have vaginas. The Resource Center issued the following statement in the show's cancellation: "We feel that the making this decision is in line with the WRC mission of recognizing and celebrating the diverse representation of women on campus, along with the overall mission of the Department of Diversity and Community Involvement, in which the WRC is housed, of supporting and empowering minoritized," I didn't know that was a word, but apparently it's minoritized students, and challenging systems and structures that perpetuate inequities. We truly believe that it is important to center our minoritized students and this decision is in line with the massive this mission-driven value. Some of the respondents said in the survey, just in time to give up on, it's just time to give up on the vagina monologues. Written in 1994, the activist Eve Ensler, because the play can't fit in today's far left feminist movement.
Listen to this.
Yeah.
Totally in line with what you're saying. Headline: Blacklisted feminists saying men aren't women used to be banal. Today it's heresy. Headline: Megan Murphy, a prominent feminist who was recently banned from Twitter for stating that men aren't women, wrote an article for Quillette on Wednesday explaining how formerly banal facts have become heresy akin to terrorist speech. That's what a feminist wrote.
Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you, this whole edifice is going to fall. It is bound to fall. Why? The last Summer Olympics, you had men competing against women and defeating women and breaking world records and winning gold medals, while women were standing on the sidelines weeping because they're coming in second and third and fourth place. And
after a lifetime of commitment to the sport.
And that is not going to last. It is, to hear all these people spin around it and say one thing, it is not going to last.
I think there's certainly going to be stronger pushback. I mean, you get lifelong committed feminists who are told now, shut up, we don't want to hear you, sit in the back of the bus because you are not the right kind of feminist for today, because your feminism only protects women of one biological kind. And, these are card-carrying liberal progressives for decades that are told by these younger groups that you don't count anymore. And you don't have the right to say what you've been saying for decades. That's not Christians who, that's not a biblical worldview. This is why it's not a liberal. It's a pure free speech issue.
It's going to fall.
It's either gonna fall apart or it's gonna become
a house divided,
violent,
cannot
to
stand.
The point of
I agree
enforcement. It's got to go one way or the other. Violent enforcement, or it's got to fall.
I agree with that. This is it reminds me of the reason why I brought up the Tower of Babel is because the people so wanted to unify that they wanted to make this one guy. They made this one guy king over everyone. And here's an instance where people just want to be led and they want to be told what they can say and what they can't say, and they want to tell others what they can say and what they can't say. It's all about power. It's a power play to the ultimate, because being able to tell people what they can say and not say is actually controlling what they can think and what they can't think.
And controls the narrative for the nation.
That's right.
Yeah.
So, to shut down opposing ideas. So I think there is a conservative versus liberal ideology going on here, because I don't hear conservatives overall trying to shut down liberal talk. They're trying to confront it. Even Bill Maher, he says he admires conservatives because they have the guts, he says, to sit down and have discussions and go on, like Ben Shapiro, to go on his show. He says liberals, he says they're weak. Anyway, I'll say that word. He uses a different word, terminology.
Yes, I know.
Can't quote him.
I know what terminology.
Can't quote verbatim, but he says they're weak and they won't dare go on these conservative shows and be able to have a fair conversation. They don't do it. So I think it is largely a conservative versus liberal bent. So
I'll only qualify that to this point, just a semantical qualification. It's like if you listen to some of the guys at the time, but they'll make a strong distinction between liberal versus progressive.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Which I think is fair in the political agenda, because 1960s, 70s, 80s, liberal, Democrat, liberal.
It would be a conservative.
Would actually be in many circles a conservative, or at least right-leaning.
Certainly moderate, very moderate, right?
At least
because they were for free speech.
Yeah,
and so you still get
and gun control.
Classical
not gun
liberal.
control. I mean, having gun.
Yeah.
Second Amendment.
Yeah, border control. I mean, even Obama 8 years ago was for border security because he was a classic. He ran as a liberal, but he was governing as a progressive. And the progressives are really the ones that are impacted by the neo-Marxist mentality, which is different than a liberal mentality. I mean, liberals are at least committed to an American constitutional system. They just had different views on what sort of how to interpret that.
And I think that's true. My biggest beef with that, and I agree with that largely, but my biggest beef is this. I don't hear a lot of liberals denouncing the progressives.
No, they are. There are.
Some more frequently. They haven't historically because they had an ally, and it's like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Right. As long as our enemy is the conservative Republicans.
Dave Rubin, Alan Dershowitz has shown himself to be.
He's been reviled for it.
Yeah, he's been lost friends.
And by whom?
Clinton lawyer.
By the progressives and by many liberals.
Right. Yes.
Because
there's still a lot of power that they don't want to lose.
Right.
Right.
So there is
a fair distinction, but I'm not too impressed with many of the.
What I would say is, I've been impressed with some people who've made the distinction between themselves and progressives. Progressivism is a disease. I'm not trying to, but it really is a bad deal overall because it's based, as you said, in power. It's based in controlling other people's speech. You're the master planners who think that you can tell the rest of us how to live and what's good and what's right. And a great discussion that we're having. There's a guy named Dan Crenshaw. You might have seen him. He's a guy, the Navy SEAL, who had his eye blown out and was made fun of by the guy on Saturday Night Live. And he ultimately went on Saturday Night Live, and they had a great.
It was a very good apology.
But he's on a panel on Face the Nation. And he's a new freshman, and he's being talked to with all these other liberals on the panel, and the host is obviously a liberal as well. And they have this great discussion on speech, and what they're saying is Donald Trump has attacked free speech. He's the tyrant, etc. And the guy says, "Hold it. What are you saying when you say this?" And he forces them to look at their language. They're saying Donald Trump has attacked free speech, and he's saying, well, who has he attacked? He's saying Obama put surveillance on people and put people in jail. He said, what do you mean? Well, they said, well, he's attacked, this one reporter, and then all the news media has put in their brief. Well, they all may have put in their briefs, but you're talking about one instance. Donald Trump isn't stopping everyone from speeching. And then they said, well, he's been attacking. And no, the guy said, stop. You need to really choose your words kindly. He says, I've been attacked. And he's got his eye blown out. Donald Trump isn't attacking anyone. He's speaking in something that you might think is not a very good leadership style or whatever. But he forced them on the panel to deal with their words because there's this groupthink going on that says you can say whatever reviling thing you want about, the president, and it's true because you say it. But when you look at the facts, they don't marry. But it was just a really good deal about our speech and really how our speech is seeking to shape reality in a way that it doesn't comport.
Yeah. Well, here's an example that I think we talked about before, and we won't dwell on it too much, but I just want to get in. So some of the updates on the situation of Berkeley, where the young Asian gal, I think she's South Korean, heritage-wise, she was resistant to a student union was trying to basically pass a resolution condemning Trump's rewrite of what he wanted to do on transgender, Title IX stuff, and just going against that. And she basically just stood up at the meeting and said, "Hey, I this doesn't comport with what I, as a Christian, believe is how men and women are created." In other words, she's saying, yes, all women do have, have vaginas. You can't just say that because you feel that way. I mean, she said, I can't buy that. But she abstained from the vote. She didn't even vote against it.
Right. Yeah,
she abstained from the vote. Right. She just shared her opinion on it and then abstained.
And that went over well, didn't it?
Here was the response. It says the Queer Alliance Resource Center, led by the student senator and letters author, had collected thousands of signatures to demand her resignation. The ASUC, while others worked to initiate a recall of the Christian Junior. A meme page, popular with Berkeley undergraduates, has been overwhelmed by ad hominem personal attacks on Chow, of the sort that one expects from internet trolls. The irony is that supporters of a resolution purported to defend against the bullying are its primary perpetrators. The trolls call her a mental imbecile and, quote, a horrible person. Chow now needs to be escorted around campus after dark for her safety. When Chow asked for the student newspaper, the Daily Californian, to publish an op-ed she authored to explain her decision, it refused. But they've run numerous editorials condemning Chow, demanding her resignation, and saying her Christian beliefs, quote, dehumanize, and call for her explicit erasure of the transgender community. That's what they're saying she is calling for. They want to erase that community. The deep irony of the campus mobs devouring one of their own is not what or why, but when Berkeley was the home of the 1964 free speech movement, where the unlikely bedfellows of leftists, anarchists, and even arch-conservative Barry Goldwater backers came together to stand up for students' rights, to protest, speak up, and actively participate in the campus discourse. But these days are long gone. According to 28 Night Foundation Gallup poll, 27% of college students believe that simply expressing political views that are upsetting or offensive to certain groups, that's a quote, should be restricted.
Is that 27%?
27%. Mm-hmm. So if you say something, a political view that's
more than
hurtful,
right,
you should be silenced. When the speech is quote, slurs and other language, almost 7 out of 10 college students want that speech banned. Similarly, in 2017, Brookings Institute survey found that 53% of all college students want, quote, offensive or biased expression prohibited, with more than 61% of Democratic Party aligned students agreeing. So when I say that, and this story is by
unless they're attacking a Christian.
Washington Examiners from that one. But yeah, that's why I say, the idea of a unicorn of free speech. It's like, this is the one that's, there's this myth of what it used to be, but now in our modern times, we need to be more sensitive, and so we can't allow this kind of thing to exist our modern sensibilities.
I am so against that in every single way. I don't care if there's an atheist or Ku Klux Klan person spewing their rhetoric. I don't care. I mean, this is America. They have the right to say it. They have the right to also suffer the consequences for their speech. I'm not separating them from the consequences. I mean, if they're going to use offensive speech, then people have the right to disagree with them and not listen to them. But you can't legislate them and tell them that they can't say it. I was listening to someone yesterday who says that when you do exactly what they're suggesting to do, it doesn't go away. It goes somewhere and festers, and it becomes worse.
Yeah.
It doesn't go away. It goes somewhere and festers, and it becomes worse. It begins to bring like minds together and meet together, and then they plan to do things that they ought not do because you're trying to stifle people. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
I think this is actually a really good example of what happens when you remove or you try and limit free speech. What happens, of course, is now what gets dictated is, here's the speech you're allowed to say.
Yeah.
And this is the same thing why there's freedom of religion. And I had this conversation with some atheists a few months ago. They did not like the idea of freedom of religion here in America. They thought that was just really biased. I said, you have no idea what you're disagreeing with. Freedom of religion is essentially freedom of worldview. Mm-hmm. And that includes freedom of speech. Freedom of speech and freedom of religion go hand in hand. Notice they're attacking her Christian faith and demonizing her Christian faith.
Yeah.
It's going to go hand in hand with, if you were to ask them, should we abolish freedom of religion? That's next on the list, and it's going to be part and
there
parcel.
Are many Christians who are accepting. This is. Let me just do this little quick quote from Nancy Piercy. Also put together a quick article about Chow called "Berkeley Antifa Targets Isabella Chow for Defending Biological Sex." But she says 2 lines here that fit exactly what you're saying, and I think is important for Christians to understand this. She says, this victimhood culture is genuinely new. No other known society has claimed moral authority on the basis of victim status. Where did it come from? Its roots are in cultural Marxism, the imposition of Marxist categories on all of culture. And that's exactly what we're talking about. It's the redefinition of things. Where I just had a friend of mine, had an article submitted, he shared the other day about the criticism of, whiteness. Whiteness is bad because whiteness is European, and we need to redefine the whole idea of Christian salvation is rooted in Western whiteness, and so redefine what salvation is. And so I've got Christians redefining, but they don't realize to redefine it, to buy into the argument those authors make, you have to be willing to redefine Christianity, whole categories of things. No longer are we individuals, but we're groups. And redefine what those groups mean or what they stand for, and that's exactly what your point is.
And then your value is tied into your expendability or your acceptance and therefore value is tied into your group, the group you're in, versus your individual nature. Now your individual worth is irrelevant. You don't have any.
Yeah.
And that's like a functional value.
Yeah.
Once you don't serve the group, you are expendable.
Exactly.
And actually a virus to the group.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because you no longer fit in the group.
It's
no longer the individual has value. It's the group. It's your group identity.
And so our founding fathers understood how worldview works. Even how it being worked out in society as far as the socio-political working out. They understood that, and they tied in the worldview, freedom of religion, and they tie it in with freedom of speech and how those went. These things are part and parcel with one another, and so foundational. And I think they're very biblical. I mean, God has granted everyone freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Mm-hmm. This is why people are allowed by God to choose what they want to follow, to accept Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior, or thumb their nose at God their Savior. Yeah. It's a biblical standard, and it's a biblical model. And what do we get? Well, unfortunately, what we get with that is sinful people living out sinful things and the conflicts therein, which we see biblically as well. Yeah. And so, trying to go against that, how do you deal with that? Well, some Christians unfortunately want to deal with it politically and make it a voting issue on certain moral issues, and I don't think that's where we should go on a lot of specifics. Like we can't outlaw adultery. So we can't. There's certain things we just can't outlaw.
Well, why not?
But so.
I'm just being. I mean, this is.
Well, then. Yeah. Well, if you're going to outlaw adultery based on a biblical definition, that's anybody who's looked at a woman or a man inappropriately.
I understand.
So we just all walk into prison and lock up, throw the key away. So it's not reasonable to do that. It's hard to set a moral boundary what the moral standard is, other than the basics. Sure. Don't rape, don't kill.
Well, here's how that was resolved historically, and this is why the shift to Marxist ideology is so destructive. Because if you look at where the Constitution came, it came from natural law thinking, philosophy of natural law. Then there was a natural law by a creator. Even to get the guys like Hobbes and John Stuart Mill.
Did Locke.
Those, they all had some form of natural theology, not necessarily a Christian worldview,
not fully Christian,
but they believed that there was a creator that gave certain inherent rights, and this natural law thinking is what undergirds the idea of free speech and property rights and those sort of things, because this is the world that they crafted. This is how you have to do this. So when you reject natural law and embrace some sort of Marxist worldview that denies God and existence, you can't just take their categories. You're taking their worldview for it to work. Right. This is what Christians need to understand. You're not just, this idea of, this category has to change, or whites have to do this, or blacks have to do, putting everybody by categories. You just can't say that and still maintain a Christian worldview, because when you accept their categories, you have to accept the undergirding sort of philosophy behind that. And you cannot mesh the Christian worldview with a Marxist worldview. Therefore, we have to reject those categories. And that's the problem we're getting into.
It's a poison pill, and they don't realize it. It's kind of like the wolf, where they put a knife out and they put blood on it and they freeze it. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
You put it and freeze it, and it'll lick it, and it's ice, it's cold, so it cools the tongue down, and it just keeps licking it. Well, they don't realize it slices its own tongue, and it can bleed to death. Right, that's how the theory goes, right? Yeah. And so hey, this tastes good, right? Well, it's your own blood. They put blood on it, but it's tasting its own blood too, and it's like,
die.
And
bleed to death.
You bleed to death, right? Yeah, bleeds to death.
Survival tips.
Yeah, that's
free and off the cuff.
What's really interesting is the mindset is all about controlling other people's actions. I mean, if you think about it, for the person who says that we need to redefine, Christianity, the whiteness in Christianity, well, what do you do about guys like Tychonius and Augustine? Now, we don't know whether they were white or black, but we do know that they were North Africans.
Yeah.
And so what do we do about those people who potentially, or Augustine, the church owes its own structure, Catholic Church anyway, to Augustine. So what do? You just erase those people from history because you don't like what came from their ideas. I don't think you can.
Well, we've talked about this before, though, but that's exactly what people do to you in circumstances because you don't follow the line. You don't count as black for many people. And you got people telling you all the time. So you don't count because you're not voicing the view,
the cultural perspective, right? The cultural perspective, and see,
they'll get rid of
people. For those people, what I consistently do is I try to differentiate their cultural perspective from the reality of what being black. I mean, they built being black into something that is more destructive and more monolithizing rather than individualizing and freeing people. It's just a very interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
It's very
well, we're coming towards the end, and so I just wanted to come up with a couple of solutions real quick that people were positive. How do they address this?
We should get rid of all white people. That's one, right?
That is one that is posited. Maybe not one that fits with what we're arguing here, but it is.
Or maybe one that you could not forward.
Yeah.
Well, there are white people that denounce whites, though.
Well, but, you're assuming that I'm white. Did you just assume my race?
I did.
Wow. Not all white people are white.
I heard a good solution about that from an
African-American
comedian.
That's very good.
That's right.
You want to know what color you really are? You go down to the paint shop there at Home Depot and get some of those chips out and find out what you are. Because white people aren't white.
Yeah.
They're more like peach.
Yeah, it could be peach. It could be anything.
Not what you see on the outside. That doesn't matter.
Yeah,
that's just the article I have.
He said he did that. He went down there and he was something like sensational chocolate. He goes, "I'm sensational chocolate."
What is this? Oh man,
I'm not black.
Anyway. There's a.
I know. Think about it.
I think we talked about it last week. That guy.
Black.
There was a guy. I think he's an MP in Britain, or he's in Poland or something like that. That he said, "I'm tired of people telling me because I'm a man I can't speak about abortion." So he's like, "I'm declaring now I'm a woman."
Right there you go. Right.
And now here's my opinion. What are you going to do? You can't silence him. No, he actually did that though at the gathering for the. I'm declaring myself as a woman now. I can speak. Now I can speak, and you can't stop me.
Yeah, that's really.
That's actually funny.
That's awesome.
That's like the guy. That's like the college kid who everybody on Michigan campus was getting their new surnames, and he called himself. I want to be called His Majesty.
Yeah.
His Majesty.
So this one article, I won't have time to get into this one, but Suzanne Nosel at the Washington Post, she tries to give some thoughts on why communication is changing, and related to free speech. I read this and she gives a bunch of things. Technology is changing, so the old adage, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me is different now because social media, it is hurtful. And
is that Milo Yiannopoulos?
Words are sticks and stones.
Yeah, words are sticks and stones.
Is that Milo Yiannopoulos on the cover?
I believe it. Yeah, it is.
He's a hated guy.
And the fourth fact, she gives this fourth factor. She talks about the polarized political language. She talks about Trump's political language and stuff that he uses. And I, to a certain point, agree with some of this. And that I think that, although Trump is a man of the times, I think there is a part of that language that I just simply
you can't accept
that is not acceptable. Yeah. Although it is effective politically, just because it's effective doesn't make it good or right. Yeah. But she's positing solutions. The one I thought would be interesting for us though is have you heard of this? It's called the Journal of Controversial Ideas. It's an actual new journal.
That sounds really good.
It's launching, and I won't have time to read all of this. But basically, a group of academics who basically are saying, hey, look, our careers are in jeopardy if we write certain things. And even if we try to write them, we can't get them published. I have a journal article I've been trying to get published forever on basically climate change and being a heuristic skeptic. Mm-hmm. Skeptic for the point of, because questions matter. Mm-hmm. Not skepticism as in, I doubt it.
Just for the sake of doubting
is like, we have to ask questions of any scientific theory. And if so, then how do you dialogue? How does religion properly dialogue with theories of climate change with that sort of, what can religion offer in the ethical side? And I've gotten rejected by a bazillion. Even one journal magazine that had a theme that was on questioning the importance of questioning scientific theory, treasures, this doesn't fit well enough with our theme, So it's very difficult. And so they talk about this. So this journal is going to allow them to publish under all pseudonyms.
Oh,
so they don't have to use their real name. the peer reviewers, everyone at the journal would know who they really are, but they won't release their name publicly because it would jeopardize their careers. And I'm involved with quite a few people that, have a lot of views that if they were known, they would get fired. And I'm talking about scientific views, not religious ones, but, scientific views. So, but this one is actually, this article comes on Quillet, which you mentioned earlier, which is, by the way, is a great, I recommend looking at them for a lot of things because they are actually doing publicly what this journal wants to do by privacy. They're the founder, is ironically a woman. She's from Australia. She's a lesbian feminist, not a believer, but she's posting all kinds of stuff.
All kinds of stuff.
I mean, just every scope of thing.
She respects the diverse marketplace ideas.
Oh yeah,
that's good.
And it's like so
that's awesome.
That's what she's promoting. But they're concerned, and these are writing from Quillet. Of course, they're being honest about their names, that they're concerned that this sort of publishing under false names just to get the ideas out is actually a step backwards, because they think that it could stifle the pursuit of valid academic, counter arguments and arguments. Sure. And I think it might be a step forward. But that's one group that's trying to posit a solution to the environment we're talking about, limiting free speech, people fearing for their jobs or their safety in some cases.
The Journal of Controversial Articles.
Yeah, so Journal of Controversial Ideas.
Quillet published an article called "Animal Rape in a Dog Park."
Oh.
She literally published that article.
Yeah, there's a broad spectrum. There's very conservative ideas,
everything,
very liberal ideas, and they publish it.
Mm-hmm.
So I give them props for that. I started following them on Twitter I've shared a few of their things on my own Twitter feed just because I just applaud the fact that even some stuff, hey, don't agree with this, but man, somebody's writing this stuff and hey, hear them out.
They're saying,
and you'll see why I disagree, hopefully, but it's good. So, well, anyway, hopefully our free speech won't become the unicorn of human rights.
I don't think that people will. I think that people will try to stop it, but I don't think that other people will allow it.
It'll be an albatross.
It's gonna, Ooh, nice play.
Thank you.
Nice play on mythological creature.
There we go.
Albatross is not a mythological
or
creature.
It might be a phoenix, which rises.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Anyway, so that's what we have. I think it's important that we learn to fight for that, not just as Christians, but as human beings. I guess is where I close with this, because it's not a liberal conservative, it's not a Christian, non-Christian, atheist idea. It's one that safeguards I think the essential dignity and nature of all human beings, the sacredness of all people by allowing free speech. And the minute we stifle it, we become, we run the risk of becoming, the Soviet gulags, all the nastiness that happens.
Well, think about if this
modern China,
yeah.
The racist 1960s South, the silence.
Well, think about it. If this is the most freest place in the world, if this is the freest place in the world, and we're going to do away with free speech, what about the rest of the world?
Yeah,
that's the question.
Yeah. So, anyway, hopefully that's a good starting point for people, and we'll, I'm sure, cover more of this again, and we'll be back. So, yeah, are we going to be around next week? I think. I know we'll take some time off for December, but we should be back next week.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'll be here.
Well, then we'll definitely be on.